What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 100 of the Book Binge, a little celebratory episode, I suppose, but also a little bit more lax in some sense, because today I'm going to react, at least in part, to several of my older videos, as requested by different people when I asked about it. I was like, well, should I do something special for 100 episodes? And I felt like I should have, or at least I felt like I should ask people if they wanted something along those lines. And yeah, I got some requests. I got 4 people who requested specific videos for me to react a little bit to, and then I have one on my own that I specifically want to look at myself. With that being said, I don't necessarily have a whole lot else to say. It's just the fact that, getting to 100 episodes is kind of crazy. The fact that it took, a year and a half to do that is also a little bit crazy, because at first I started this whole thing on doing 1 episode a week. Basically every single week. There was only a handful of weeks that I missed because of time-related stuff that I wasn't sure I was going to be able to hit, and I'll explain a little bit more of that later. But generally speaking, I'm just glad that I've hit this point. It feels really, really, really cool to have hit that point. So thank you to everybody who has supported me along the way, especially with my quick little previews I did of a couple of different videos than the ones that I'm going to be reacting to, some of my early ones. Man, some of those early videos are not great, and particularly visually, holy cow, some of them look terrible, as you will shortly see. With that being said, let's just kind of go ahead and get into the video. Let me switch over to this little scene over here where I can go ahead and select the videos that I'm going to react to, at least in part. I'm not going to react to the whole thing, because if I were to react to any of these videos in their entirety, man, all of the ones that I'd be reacting to would be, half-hour long, pretty much. All of these reactions would be. But with that being said, the very first episode that I'm going to react to will be the second episode of the Book Binge, requested by Vince. This is going to be my review of The Hobbits. Let's go ahead and check it out.
It is very, very windy outside.
See what I mean by how terrible it looks? I remember these intros. Not particularly great intro, but, it worked for the time. I still like that background image, though. Oh, I totally forgot about the second part of this. Some of these titles have changed, by the way. I'm still working on some of these, but working on outlines rather than the actual writing now.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Book Binge on the King Crusoe YouTube channel.
I gotta say,
last week we went into the books and stuff that I had just finished reading in 2022, and kind of outlined some of the plans for these episodes for the rest of January.
Automatically, you can see I didn't actually fix that edit. I had said that I read in 2022, and at that point it would have been what I read in 2021. Visually speaking, like I said, like, it looks really, really, really terrible. I don't know why there's so much noise. I remember thinking about that a lot at one point, but I have no clue why it's particularly the case in some of these early videos, like this one. It looks terrible. Even at this point in time, I was recording with my phone, actually, my phone camera, but so there are several videos that came out later in 2022, even just a few months later, that look infinitely better than this one does, and I have no clue why that is. But in terms of the audio, I'm surprised the audio sounds as good as it does, because I was using my old, what is it called, Blue Yeti microphone at this point, and I was using that basically all the way until the start of this year in 2023, and any changes that I ever made audio-wise were, a bunch of post-production edits on the audio track. And nowadays I actually don't do any audio editing except for maybe shifting some of the volume of it occasionally if I need to. But yeah, I'm kind of surprised by that.
As I mentioned in my intro, it is very windy outside, so theoretically, with audio
Back in my
editing
days
and
of
both
over-explaining
noise
everything in my
like
intros.
that, I'm able to cut
Even
off
nowadays I
all of
sometimes
that
still do that,
nonsense
but
in post,
probably
so
even
that
in
you're
this
not
video I
hearing
did
all of
that.
it. But if there's random, like, gusts and stuff while I'm talking, that might not be able to be cut out properly, so just bear with
Definitely
me for that.
didn't need
I
to
am
explain
actually
any of this stuff, but
recording my reviews for The Hobbit, Carrie, and The Wrath of Darth Maul all right now at the
again, didn't
same
need to
time,
explain any of
so
this. Let's just
hopefully
kind of
it's not
skip
too big of
forward
an
through the
issue.
rest
That I
of the
maybe just
intro.
most of it is because I actually only remember, like, I
Okay, let's
actually
skip back.
first read this book, or maybe just most of this book, in 6th grade. The reason I say maybe just most of it is because I actually only remember like 85% or so of this book if I were to take a gander at that estimate.
I still
There were a
remember
lot of things
explaining
that
all
happened
this
at the
too.
end of
I
this
can
book that
remember
I
exactly where
genuinely
I
do
was
not
just over
remember
in this
reading in
corner
6th
back
grade,
here.
so I wonder if maybe I didn't actually finish or something random like that. But either way, I have read most of this book before, so it's not completely new to me. At the
I
age
was
that I
also
was at in
surprisingly
6th
bald
grade, I
at
was
this
still
point. I
reading
didn't realize I
mostly
had started
YA stuff. I
doing the
mean, most
mostly
of my
bald
life,
look
even
as
since
far
then,
back
I've
as
been
this.
reading mostly YA stuff. But up till 6th grade, when I read The Hobbit, I'd been reading mostly just like Rick Riordan stuff and other YA material that's similar to that. So The Hobbit was kind of my first adventure into something a little bit
Also
more
back in the ring
complex,
light days
even though
where
The
the
Hobbit
ring
is a
light
little
is
bit different
super
from The Lord of
egregious.
the Rings from
I
my
tried
experience
to
because it
edit
has a
that and
lot
change
more of
that in
a
future videos, but it
bedtime
took a little
story
bit
kind
before
of
I
feel.
decided
Like the
like I
way that
just
the
need to stop
narration
doing
is,
this.
it almost feels like something that you would read to somebody in bed, especially since it's so short. I do remember that The Hobbit, despite being very short, was actually a big block, kind of like a roadblock for me at the time that I read it. So when I came back to it, I was expecting something a little bit more difficult than I got, especially considering that, like I said, this is kind of like a bedtime story in a lot of ways. There's a lot of things about it in terms of the prose and the writing style, and a lot of the choices made in terms of pacing and whatnot that makes this book a really quick read. I mean, it is really short.
All of this is still true. I completely agree with all the things that I'm saying here. I'm kind of surprised by how, solidified my cadence already was, even just in this video. I'd only recorded like 3 videos up to this point, something like that. 3, maybe 4 videos prior to this. I think it was only 2 or 3. So the fact that my cadence and the way that I was talking is actually already so similar to how it still is, even just in this video, is crazy. I know my very first video that I recorded for the channel in the booktube space, my very first state of affairs, was really rough in that regard. That's a video that I'm not going to go back and rewatch because I'll just cringe myself into oblivion. I cringe just thinking about that, but yeah, this is actually going
Only
surprisingly
took me
smooth.
that point. I do have very fond memories of this book, going all the way back to 6th grade from when I first started reading it, particularly in the first chapter. I remember, like, there's a lot more material in terms of the writing and in terms of some of the story and some of the decisions that were made that I just kind of really click with in a way that I actually wasn't anticipating. Overall, I really have no complaints about The Hobbit. It's a really good book. There are a few elements in some chapters that aren't perfect and aren't particularly satisfying in some ways, which we'll get to a little bit later in a different section, but I would say that none of it is anything that ruins the experience of reading this book.
It's it's just kind of funny going through all of this. Like, this is kind of like my still in the introduction phase of my videos in terms of like the timestamps and everything like that. So the fact that I'm still going through all this, but it's like 5 minutes in the videos, whereas most of the time I'm able to do this in 2 minutes max, usually as little as 1 minute now, is kind of crazy. My cadence and everything hasn't changed that much. I've just gotten used to talking a little bit quicker over the time since I started doing these videos, so that's really interesting to see as well.
There are some situations where it kind of allows, or the book slightly suffers in a couple areas because of this brief nature, but I would say overall it's fine. There are some sections that are really aided by the fact that it is so short. Uh, The Hobbit is a perfect, perfect introduction to get you into that kind of style. And the reason I say this is that because although there are some series like Harry Potter, for example, that is very popular with younger readers, even kids in like elementary school can read a lot of Harry Potter books, those books aren't your typical type of fantasy. I would consider them in a completely different subgenre of fantasy, although I'm not going to name any specifics because where there's a lot that just wouldn't happen in our current world, even if those magics existed. It's just built off of an entirely different foundation.
Yeah, I used to over explain a whole lot, that is for sure. I really, really, really did over explain in some of my early videos, which is why several of my early videos were really long. Like, most of these first, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 out of my 7 first episodes of the Book Binge, all but 2 of them were longer than 20 minutes. And the 2 that weren't 20 minutes or longer were within 2.5 minutes of being 20 minutes. So like they're pretty lengthy, whereas nowadays just as many of my videos are, 10 to 15 minutes as are 20 minutes or longer. I feel like my average is actually closer to that 13 to 17 minute range nowadays rather than this 20 plus minutes. So that's also kind of crazy. I'm going to go ahead and skip forward a little bit more.
Fantastic for that. And I and that it took me about 9 hours to read this book. It felt like it maybe took 5 or 6. It just goes by so quick. And also consider when I say that this took me 9 hours to read that I read super slow. So this is probably
oh, the origins of my I read super slowism. This thing that I say on the channel all of the time. In fact, I say it way too much. I say it in pretty much every video, it feels like sometimes. Originated in here, or maybe it originated in the first episode of the Book Binge, but even so, it's funny to watch this first actual book review to have that. Some things never change, let's just put it that way.
It's just kind of something that works super well for this book. It's really charming, and it's even funny in some instances, because it very much is conducive to that bedtime story quality of the story.
I was also a little repetitive back in the day as well.
Like
certain points I would make would reflect on other points, and I would say the same thing over and over.
A very great tonal choice. There are some areas that even switch of having actual worded titles for each chapter. It's something that is much more common in fantasy than a lot of other genres. Just reading that chapter title, you have no clue what that means.
But I don't know why I made a point about this.
Makes perfect sense.
I've never even thought about talking about chapter titles in the time since then.
How well told, good. I mean, differentiate.
I guess I was just fishing for things to, put in the good and the bad and stuff like that. So I was just finding every little thing and talking about all that, which is also probably part of the reason why some of these videos were so long as well.
But it's just the fact that he's able to convey so many different emotions and stuff like that in between different chapters so well. For example, one chapter will be extremely dreary and not necessarily creepy, but like just kind of depressing-ish. And then the next chapter will be super positive and hopeful. And there will sometimes even be sections in between that are like this. For example, the journey that they're taking in chapter 2, the start of it is super happy and cheerful and joyful, and all the characters are having a great time. But then in the matter of just a paragraph, Tolkien is able to shift that into something that's much more not fun, much more gloomy, I guess, because it's kind of a storm that occurs.
I'm surprised by how well this is holding up. I'm genuinely surprised. Visually, it does not hold up at all, but the actual content holds up a lot better than I was thinking it would. I'm not cringing at all watching this. It's basically the same as everything that I do since then.
Ruined the book. Like, it is absolutely. I will wholeheartedly give this a solid 9.5 out of 10, because I
genuinely don't ever remember giving scores in any of my reviews on the channel. There have been multiple points over the last year and a half where I've actually commented on that and have said, well, I don't actually rate the books that I read on the channel. I guess I have at one point or another. And I didn't even remember doing that. It was kind of like at the very beginning of the video where I went in and, had a little quick snippet, an intro before I actually started, the intro sequence. I didn't remember that I did that. I had no recollection of doing that in any of my videos either. That's kind of interesting. I did not expect for that very first episode or the very first book review on the series to hold up that well. And as I am now discovering, because I'm going through these videos, this video is going to be quite a lengthy one, but I'm okay with that. This next one that we're going to react to is episode 4, my review of The Wrath of Darth Maul by Ryder Wyndham. This is not a request by anybody in particular. This is one that I want to check out myself, because it is one of my more popular videos on the channel. It's one of the only videos that has, seen a pretty constant, increase in views and watch hours and stuff over the entirety of the time that it's been published, because I guess it's just kind of very particular type of book, very particular review that is like, it's going to be advertised to people who are interested in watching it, I guess. That's kind of what it seems like has happened. So I want to watch this for myself. But good to know is that, like I said in that Hobbit intro, I recorded Hobbit, Carrie, and The Wrath of Darth Maul all at the same time in the same morning. So this will have been recorded at the same time as The Hobbit was. So it'll probably, my prediction is it'll look exactly as bad, but then the content, who knows what it'll be like. I remember this is one of the
So
only times I've ever gone through and done like a plot, beat by beat or synopsis or anything like that. I remember that because of the fact that I don't really do that. I like to do spoiler-free reviews, and even in the reviews where I've discussed spoilers, like for Kingdoms of Death and Ashes of Man by Christopher Rocchio, I've made it explicit, like, this is a spoiler-filled section, skip this. Here, I did a brief, you know, relatively spoiler-free, like, more a back-of-the-book type of summary of what happens in the book, because it was one that I didn't think many people would be able to get a hold of, because it's kind of hard to find. But let's kind of see what this one looks
after
like.
just recording the 2 book reviews for the last couple
There we go.
weeks
There's
of
the
The Hobbit and
explanation.
Carrie, I just realized that I never turned on that studio light up there. So hopefully the lighting is a lot better this time.
I mean, it doesn't look necessarily worse. The ring light is really distracting. That's the worst part of the lighting.
Covering a little bit of a different book, a sleeper hit. Something that, well, not even a sleeper hit. Nobody knows that this book exists,
There we go. I was
probably.
just going to comment on that, and then I
The Wrath of
explained
Darth
it
Maul
myself. Oh
by
my
Ryder
goodness.
Windham. It's a little supplemental Star Wars book that I'm assuming was actually canon at some point in time.
I think it was. I'm pretty
That's
sure
a
it
discussion that
was.
we'll have a little bit later. This
I'm also surprised by how many
episode
people have
is
watched
kind
this
of
video too, and have commented about it, and like the way that they appreciated what I said about it because they read it at one point or another and thought the same thing. That's something that I got a lot
in
from this video as
partnership
well.
to a certain extent with
How the
the
heck was this
podcast
video
episode that came
18
out
minutes
last
long?
Friday that Lane and I did. The seasonal podcast for the
Podcast.
Star Wars
Wow.
retrospective episode 1 on the Phantom Menace. So these two are kind of going together. I mentioned
I
this
completely
book
forgot
a
about
couple
that
times
aspect.
in that episode.
Oh man.
Not as much as I was hoping that I could, but that episode turned out being a little bit too long in the first place. So this review exists for that reason. This book is very special to me.
Interesting.
It's easily one of my favorites of all time. It's
Still
one
true.
that I wish others could read more. Like, if I were to look on Amazon or any other place like that and look for
I did a
copies of
lot
this,
more
there would probably
explicit
be like
fiddling with
maybe
books
half
back
a
in the
dozen
day,
of
I
these
guess
on
too.
sale in like poor condition for like a couple bucks. So it's not like it'd be that expensive to get yourself a copy. But if you wanted to get yourself one as nice as this, that ring light reflects rather nicely on there, actually. If you wanted to get yourself a copy of this,
Same
you could
annoying
for like
laugh that
a
I've
couple
always
bucks.
had. I hate it.
It probably wouldn't be that good of a copy, but if it's good enough to read, it is definitely worth it. That's what I'll say ahead of anything else that
I still fully agree with this point, by the way. If you can get a copy of this book, it is absolutely worth reading. It's too short, quite frankly. There's a lot of it that goes by too quickly and that I want more of. But it is a very good book for what it is, especially for most people could read it in one day. I think even I could read it in one day if I really wanted to at this point. So, like, yeah, it's absolutely worth checking out.
talk about in this review is that this book is absolutely worth it. It is so good. I love Darth Maul. I've always been a fan of Darth Maul. I've always felt like he's one of the most underrated characters in the entire Star Wars universe.
I still think
Although
that's
I understand
mostly
that he's gotten
true.
more popular because of the Clone Wars, that whole
Yeah,
series.
I was just
But
about to make that point. I think in terms of Darth Maul's, role in Star Wars prior to the Clone Wars and Rebels or whatever else he appears in, I think he is one of the most underrated characters and absolutely the most underutilized. Absolutely. I think they definitely could have done the prequels without having Count Dooku in there, or at least having Count Dooku in some sort of different role, and just instead having a Darth Maul be the villain through most of the trilogy alongside Palpatine. I think that would have made for a really interesting dynamic with Anakin and Obi-Wan and Darth Maul. I genuinely think that would be really cool to see, but of course, some of that stuff you can't change, but I do really like Darth Maul, man.
in terms of
Darth
just
Maul
the
is cool.
movies and the other parts of the franchise, Darth Maul is super underrated. Like, he's my favorite Sith. And this book,
Oh
what
yeah, I don't even know if I actually made that point. We're reacting to The Hobbit. These days, back in my early videos, I had a lot more cuts as well. This is a little bit more of the behind the scene things. Some of these early videos would have recording files that were like 35 or 40 minutes long, and you would see them become these videos that are only like 20 minutes long or something like that. Big spaces of time in between a lot of my sentences. Like I would, finish up a thought as I had it on my notes on my laptop next to the camera. I would finish up that thought, then I'd spend like 20 seconds looking at the next note and figuring out how I'm going to word it. So I guess that's kind of where some of my, more my increased comfort comes from at this point, is because I can look at my notes and I already know how I'm going to say things, and the way I write my notes is more conducive to how I say things as well, as opposed to these days was more like trying to use it as a script when I really shouldn't have been trying to use any of it as a script. But that's an interesting behind the scenes point I
it
wanted to
does is
make
it
there.
covers a lot of his childhood and being brought up in training under Darth Sidious as a Sith. It is such a good story. It's not really coming of age, and the way that
What's it say? Sorry about the truck in the background. People in this town really feel a need to compensate. I mean, it's true. Back when I did record with my phone and my mic over in this corner of the room, and especially by this wall, yeah, every single time I recorded a video, there were people just plowing through with their trucks. And since this was also January as well, people were using their trucks for, moving snow and, you know, getting through the snow in the first place. But yeah, that's really funny that I made that
you would
point.
typically think of coming of age like Stephen King's It or something like that, but it is still a very, very good book. Like I said, you
It's
could
funny
probably get it
because
for a
it's not
couple
even
bucks if you.
really that noticeable in the video. There have been many instances in the time since then where those kind of trucks and stuff in the background were so much more noticeable. So it's funny that I made that
Wanted to
point
get a
here. Yeah, that was
rough
something that would be
copy,
consistent for
maybe.
months
I
on the channel.
genuinely believe that you should read this book. So it's also super quick and short, like almost to a fault, even. I constantly want more information, more details, more story. But what exists here is definitely incredible. It is a very worthy book.
See, that there comes a little bit more of that repetition stuff again. I made some of the same points already just 2 minutes earlier, so I didn't need to include this, but interesting how much
In
it
every
holds up in
right.
spite of that, though.
This is going to be a little bit different than a typical book review because, like I said, this book is going to be so hard for most people to get a hold of. Book that most people probably haven't even heard of. It'll probably do fine for me to give like a kind of generalized summary to an extent, so that's what I'm going to do here.
I'm not going to go ahead. I'm going to skip the generalized summary here just in case you don't want to see that. Not going to force you to go through that or skip any of this video for that purpose. So I'm going to go ahead and skip through some of this because I know that there's a bit of it.
And if he doesn't remember who Obi-Wan is at any given point in time,
I don't know if that's still that material,
yes.
but let me
And I've
move
only
on.
had it since maybe sixth grade or something like that. So I've read it like once a year.
I think I might
I
have
read it
gotten it
like
in
once
fifth
a year
grade,
for probably like
but it
5
was
years up
somewhere in
until
that
like
fifth
three
to
years
sixth
ago.
grade
And then
range.
I
It
read
was
it
while I was in the middle school here
again
in town.
in September. Other than that, like, yeah, I've probably read it like 6 times. It is very good. And
That is also true. I have read this book a lot. Definitely a lot. Like I can remember at least 4 of the different times that I read it. One time where I did all of the reading while I was at school. One time where I did all the reading at camp. Just when I read it in late 2021, and then one time where I read it mostly at home in middle school as well. So that's at least 4 times just right there. But I'm pretty sure it was more than that because I was reading it yearly for a little bit. And it's such a short book that it's easy for me to do that.
very short. Like, it only takes a few hours to read, honestly. Like, it's only like 200 pages. It's short and easy. It is worth reading, for sure. This book is the reason why I actually wish Darth Maul was the Sith in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith.
I just made that point earlier here too. It's funny, like some of my thoughts, my opinions haven't changed on some of this stuff. It's really funny and interesting to see that.
Originally in episode 1, when Maul nearly ran him over. 5 out of 10, since I tend to go by 0.75 increments. But realistically, this book is 9.9 out of 10. Like, it is so close to perfect.
I guess I was. Well, the fact that I've recorded these 3 videos at the same time, The Hobbit, Carrie, and Wrath of Darth Maul, it makes sense that the score would be in here too, since I had just done it in The Hobbit. But I don't know how long I did scores, and I don't know how long I did these little intro snippets here at the very beginning of these videos as well. It's really interesting. I wonder how soon I stopped doing that, to be completely honest. I'm just going to open the Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring review and see if any of that is in there. Yeah, no. Already by the next book review after that, I had already stopped doing the intro snippets, and I don't know what prompted me to do that. I think I might have just forgotten that I did them, because I caught me by surprise when I saw that. So next up, we're going to react to episode 13, my first review of The Gunslinger, Dark Tower number 1. This one was a request by Patrick. Let's go ahead and move into this one. I believe this is a shorter video as well. Yeah, it was less than 10 minutes. So this will be a little bit easier to cover as well in here.
Covering The Shining. Hopefully I covered your YouTube channel. This is episode 13, and this week we are covering The Gunslinger.
Wow,
by
that ring light is obnoxious, and my hair looks terrible.
You can click right up there. I've covered
by this
Carrie
point,
and
I had
Sam's
already
lot
gotten
so
that
far.
that bookshelf in the background. That's interesting. Apparently by this point, I think I must have rearranged a portion of my desk for my recording space, even just a little bit, to change some of the angle of how some of this looks. My PC back there in the background, you can see some of the books there. That's interesting. This little thing on the screen over here, that you might have seen better in some of the other videos. I don't even know where that thing is anymore. I think I might have thrown it away, which disappoints me. I kind of wanted to hang that on one of my walls again, but whatever. That was an art project that I did that I was really proud of. But let's continue with the video.
But in the coming months, you will see reviews for obviously this, because I'm doing it right now, but I'll also be covering The Shining, hopefully soonish. Probably in May, if I'm remembering
That was
correctly,
true.
Depending on how I can fit things into my schedule. But then I'll also be covering more of the Dark Tower in coming months, as well as I continue to read through this series. But
that was also true. In June through July, basically, maybe even moving into September, like over the course of those 3 months, I did the reviews for all of the rest of the series, and it was nearly back-to-back weeks that most of those reviews came out, from the Wastelands all the way through the Dark Tower, and then the full series ranking after that. So interesting point that I made that turned out being true.
We obviously have to start with The Gunslinger. At the time of recording, I still have yet to even start book 2, but by the time you are seeing this, at the time of release, I should be somewhere in the middle of book 3 or so. Something that I know
there started the trend of me doing videos and scheduling them way in advance and getting them prepared way in advance, because I don't like to be behind or having to rush stuff, especially with my internet. So that's an interesting point as well.
in my monthly reading wrap-up for February, when I discussed that I had read this book in January.
Also, if you're wondering what that editing thing is here in the background over here, I'm thinking that's probably when I finally edited the what was it called, the Uncharted 2 critical analysis video. If it's that I'm pretty sure that was when I did that. So it's interesting that that's there, and why that's up. I guess I just decided to keep it up there because I could.
I've seen this book surprisingly low in rankings.
And also, since this is a different recording, position, visually it still looks pretty terrible, and I don't know why. I wonder if this was when I was still trying to use noise reduction in the videos that I was rendering. But I don't think by this point I was still doing that, so I don't know if that makes sense. It just still doesn't look great.
Material. Like, I even saw one person do a video on, ranking Stephen King books, and put The Gunslinger at the very bottom of the ranking, and that very much surprised me. Like, especially after reading this book, I just don't see it. For me, the impressions that I got from this book and the time that I had reading it was very enjoyable, and I thought that everything was great. So let's kind of talk about the things that I think about the book in general. First off, the Western vibe is very fantastic. Like, I had a very fun time reading this. I'm not a very big fan of.
Yeah, I think by this point that I had, gotten around to, I don't know, by this point, upwards of 10 book reviews in, I pretty much had my formula and the way that I talked about books more or less settled, so that's interesting to see.
It worked for me. Throughout the story, you'll
A
encounter
lot
many
more cuts, like I
flashbacks.
said, in
I think
between
these
all
are
of my
very
different
good,
thoughts and
even though some
ideas.
of
I would
them are
have to cut
admittedly a
because I
little
would
bit
have a lot of
confusing.
space
Like,
in
I had a
between
hard
them.
time deciphering what some of them meant, but I do know that basically that at least in this revised version, everything was fixed up to greater foreshadow things to come in the series. So I'm probably actually going to try to carve out time to reread The Gunslinger after I finish the series just to see what those things are.
I did do that, and I would say it was absolutely worth it. And this is why I specified, just a few minutes ago that it was my first time reviewing The Gunslinger, because I did do another review of The Gunslinger after my reread of it. It's not something that I'm doing with, say, like Sun Eater that I'm rereading right now. I'm not going to re-review those, but this one I felt like was worth rereading just because of how much different The Gunslinger is on the reread. After you've finished the whole series, if you read this full series, read The Gunslinger after you finish Dark Tower 7. Please do it. It is worth it. If you were lukewarm on or even disliked The Gunslinger before, you are guaranteed to find a heck of a lot more to appreciate. And even if you enjoyed it the first time like I did, there's a heck of a lot more to enjoy the second.
Because at this point, as a first read, I obviously don't know what a lot of this stuff means. Like, plenty of the things that occur, especially in the flashbacks, definitely confused me.
That is also very true. A lot of that stuff had entirely different meaning on the reread, but it was generally just easier to get through, easier to understand.
Because at this point, as a first read, I obviously don't know what a lot of this stuff means.
Yeah, I think in my re-review I had mentioned that maybe like 80% of The Gunslinger the first time around had completely gone over my head. That's how little of it I understood, even though I enjoyed it. That definitely comes through here.
Like, plenty of the things that occur, especially in the flashbacks, definitely confused me and I had a bit of a hard time understanding what was going on. But at the very least, I very much enjoyed all the characters. There aren't that many characters overall, but they're all very intriguing at the very least. Interactions and relationships between certain characters that occur throughout the tale are very interesting, particularly between the main characters traveling to the Dark Tower or trying to chase the Man in Black, because the first line of this book is the Man in Black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. Obviously, that more or less encapsulates the entire plot of the story, to be perfectly honest. In one sentence, that is the plot of the story. So, as you are following the gunslinger chase the Man in Black, there are some interactions that you see occur between certain characters, and they're all very nice. Like, I just like the interactions. Obviously, Stephen King did a very good job with characters here.
Not really a whole lot to comment here on what I've been watching. It's just the fact that, like I said, my flow and my cadence, the way that I'm talking and stuff is very consistent with how it is now and how I review. So interesting to see that.
Me, because I couldn't do anything this evocative if I wanted to. Speaking of evocative, visuals and descriptions are very evocative. Just the imagery that King uses in this book is utilized to a great degree at the point. Many of them are
So many
fantastic,
cuts in
and
this
I just
video.
had to
Wow.
write some of them down. In fact, there was one section, I won't say the actual quotes here because a couple of them are a little bit spoilery, especially the one that I'm about to mention here, the preceding context to the multi-page philosophical passage of chapter 5.
It's still the thing that I think I liked best about the Gunslinger was the philosophical section. Yeah, at the very end, that was something that I really enjoyed.
Is probably 1,000 or more words to this philosophical section, and I just loved everything about it. But all those things being said, this book definitely is not perfect, and I will say that the worst section of the book is, like I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, that some sections are slightly confusing. Some things, particularly in the flashbacks, aren't super clear, especially to somebody first time reading. Not a lot of the things make sense. But really, that's fine, because in a way, a lot of The Gunslinger just feels like a fever dream in the first place.
That's kind of the Dark Tower as a whole. That's not even relegated just to the Gunslinger. That is the entire series is kind of a fever dream.
So the fact that you don't understand 100% what's going for the book, there's that. And really, are absolutely amazing. If nothing else, it made me very much excited to continue with the series. So even if there was nothing else going for the book, there's that. And really,
That's also a
I
fair
don't
point.
know if there's a whole lot more for me to say at this point. Like, this book is really short, and most of the specific thoughts that I have, like most of the things that I want to talk about, are very spoilery, and I'm not really into the vibe of doing whole spoiler reviews, so that's something that'll probably occur in like a full series discussion video later down the line when I
My full series ranking went into spoilers of the entire book, so or of the entire series, so that definitely held up. And one thing that I want to note as well is me saying I'm not into the vibe of doing spoiler reviews or anything like that. It's interesting that I say that because part of the reason that I started doing spoiler talks, or rather my reading diaries on the Wheel of Time up there, is because I wanted to be able to discuss those with people and have videos discussing my journey through those books and kind of have a record of my thoughts throughout the series, even more so than just the notes that I take, because videos would be a little bit easier to go through than just a bunch of notes and stuff like that. And the reason I did that was because I wanted to be able to talk spoilers without them being spoiler reviews. Because all of my reviews are completely spoiler free except where otherwise noted. Like I said, Ashes of Man and Kingdoms of Death, I did spoiler sections within them, but everything else otherwise is perfectly spoiler free. Sorry, Patrick, that there wasn't necessarily a whole lot to comment on in that one. I guess I had my formula and there wasn't really much to talk about. The next one we're going to react to is episode 15. My review of Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage by Alfred Lansing. This one was requested by Alistair. Thank you for requesting this one. This is one that I'm interested to see because this one actually follows a little bit of a different formula. I didn't have notes for this one when I recorded it, so this one's completely off the cuff and off the top of my head. And just like the Gunslinger review was 10 minutes, this one is 8 minutes. Like, there's not much going on in here.
Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage by Alfred Lansing. This is one that
Again, I look
probably relatively
terrible.
few of you
My
have
hair
ever
looks
heard of.
terrible.
It
The
is a
ring light looks
nonfiction book,
terrible.
a
But then
biographical
again, I look
telling
terrible
of
in general,
the
so that's
time
fine.
that Sir Ernest Shackleton, did a voyage down to Antarctica, trying to sail through, and the tale that commenced in that regard. It was based on many personal interviews with everybody who was on the voyage, as well as diaries and stuff like that. So although there is, I believe, a book called Endurance by Shackleton himself, this is, I think, probably the more well-known version of the tale. I may be wrong in that, but this is the one that I read nonetheless. I read this in starting in late November of 2021, but finished it in December of 2021, so it's been a little bit since I read it, but I do remember my feelings about it well enough. All of my reviews are unscripted on the Book Binge, but every single review up to this point I've had notes on my computer to kind of go off of so that I knew some things
That
that
has
I
been
would
true.
reference and some things that I would talk about and some points that I would make in the review, but this time is the first time that I'm actually going without even notes. I just didn't have time to take notes for this review. I've been
That is
trying to
true.
make time to take notes for this review for literally weeks before trying to record it, but I just didn't manage to get the time to be able to do it. So I'm
Believe it or not, sometimes it is very difficult to go around and take notes for videos, or even just record a video after I take the notes. For example, I've had like a dozen videos that I did the notes for, a few weeks ago that have been waiting to be recorded that I just haven't yet. This video, I've had the notes for like over here, like I've had prepped for me to actually record it for a couple months now, and I just now finally getting around to it like a week before the video is supposed to come out when I could have done it like 2 months ago. Um, but in terms of making notes, yeah, it takes a little bit of time. It usually takes an hour or two to do my notes on any given video, and sometimes it takes a little bit more, and it takes a bit of brain power. And if I don't have the active time to do that, I'm not going to be able to do that. I think a lot of the reason why I didn't have time for this one was because I had other videos that I found taking the notes for to be more important at the time, and I was still actively doing school, and I was still getting used to a new job. So all of these, oh, well, it was simultaneously getting used to a new job but preparing for a very busy work schedule, which is why this video came out in April, I think, of 2022, which was during overhaul of my work at that point where I was working 70 plus hours a week. And for this first year, I was not sure if I would be able to get even just one video out every week, so I didn't even plan to. I scheduled some of these videos for once every other week because that I could guarantee being able to get, 4 or 5 videos recorded ahead of time prior to this, getting them done, and then having them up, and then not having to actually work on videos until, May, when everything was over, just in case I didn't have time during April to prepare anything. So that was part of the reason why this didn't get prepared before that as well, was because I was just like, I remember it well enough to do a really short review just to kind of fill in the space. Let's do it. So that's kind of where that came
I'm
from.
going completely off the top of the dome here, so sorry if this is a little bit rough around the edges, or sorry if it's even a little bit shorter because I don't have set things that I want to talk about.
A little
But a
bit
couple of
short. It
points
was
that I will
really
make
short.
is that I actually very much enjoyed this book a lot more than I thought. Probably the greatest point in this book's favor is the fact that really for a very, I wouldn't say necessarily for most of the book, but for a significant portion of it, nothing really happens, but I found myself very much loving to read on every single page. Like,
That is an interesting point as well. Recently, a friend just went through and read this for the first time, and he had commented how there's not really much going on and that she wants a little bit more to actually happen. A little bit too much of it is description. And rewatching this, it's interesting that I kind of made a relatively similar point. In memory, at this point in time, I did not recall that specifically. I just enjoyed reading it for what it was. But it's interesting that I did make the point that there's a lot of it that not a whole lot actually happens, and it's kind of the thing. Like a lot of the book is just a waiting game, and that is true.
for some reason, the pages go by much faster than you think that they would. It doesn't really make much sense, but every single word feels important in some way, I guess. Nothing feels wasted. This doesn't feel like there's any filler in it, even though for a fair portion of the book, like I said, there isn't really much happening. But
I
it's
still
really
concede to
just like
that
the
statement.
vibe of
I don't ever remember any of the book feeling like it was wasted or feeling like it was too long or feeling like nothing happened, even though nothing happened.
the
Interesting
book
point.
is very good. Just and kind of the struggle that they're going through in a lot of regards. And the testament to how good the tale is just the fact that I enjoyed reading. How many pages is this book? I enjoyed reading about 230-ish pages of this book, despite the fact that it could have been, if you wanted to tell this book as fast as possible, you could write it in probably 70 words or something like that. But the fact that it was able, or 70 pages, sorry.
Okay,
So
I
the
was gonna
fact
say
that it
I
was
was
able
just
to
about
be,
to correct myself.
spread out into about 230 pages, but nothing it feels like it was forced in or like it doesn't matter, is very good. Probably the best thing that I can say in order to recommend this is if any of you have read Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, the
This
very
is what I
beginning of
was
the
waiting
book, and
for.
to a lesser extent, the final portion of it called Walton in Continuation, or I believe that's what it's called, but mostly the beginning of the book, like the very opener as well as the first couple letters. If you enjoyed the very opening to Frankenstein, you will probably enjoy reading this book. Because the
I
opener to
made the
Frankenstein,
exact same point in the Frankenstein review that I did earlier this year as well. When I said that, I was like, if you haven't read Frankenstein but you have read Endurance, and you enjoy the vibe of Endurance, kind of what's going on, you'll at the very least really enjoy the introduction to Frankenstein tonally. That was a point that I made there as well, or at least I'm pretty sure I made that point because it's still one of the things that I remember. If I think of either of those books, or at least kind of like the Winter Voyage stuff, that's definitely what I think of.
definitely gave me heavy vibes of Endurance. Like, just in terms of having a boat stuck in ice, and characters trying to get set free, and just kind of the feeling and mood, the kind of images that are evoked in the mind about being a ship in the middle of ice, except in this case it's the Arctic, whereas in the beginning of Frankenstein it's in this book it's the Antarctic, whereas in the beginning of Frankenstein it's the Arctic. If you enjoyed the beginning of Frankenstein, I'm sure that you will enjoy this book. That's really all there is to it. So if you've read Frankenstein, which I also highly recommend, which I'll get into in just a minute or two, a few times in this video up to this point. So what is the day that this video is coming out? Let me double check just real quick. Yes, just what I thought. This video is coming out on April 18th,
Yeah, I
which is
figured
the
it was in
third
April.
Monday of April. But this Friday, the fourth Friday of April, on April 22nd,
Oh, I
I
guess I'm
will.
going in all of the conclusion stuff, talking about other stuff on the channel, so we don't need to go into all that. I think I had mentioned it in that Hobbit review. I little bit talked definitely too much in the conclusions and the introductions of all these videos, especially early on. Yeah, that one held up pretty well. I'm really surprised by how well all these videos hold up. Like, if I were just listening to them, I would have, essentially no problem revisiting many of these early videos. And I find that just so interesting because there's some of them that I expected to go into and be like, this is absolute cringe. That's what I thought The Hobbit was going to be for sure. And it wasn't at all. Like, I'm really surprised by how it's holding up. But anyway, let's get into the final one of these videos that I am going to essentially react to. Another short one, only 10 minutes. It will be episode 16, The Shining by Stephen King. A request by Omar, so thank you for that request.
We are doing a review of Stephen King's The Shining. Now, this is a very legendary book. There's not necessarily a whole lot that I can or need to say before we just kind of get right into some of my thoughts. I'm still going through all of Stephen King's bibliography in chronological order, not including The Dark Tower. I mentioned in episode 12 of the series, I believe, which
What
was
was
the
12?
Salem's Lot
Salem's, yeah,
review,
that was
that I was
correct.
surprised by how good it was compared to the expectations that everybody else had, or the expectations that I had based on the recommendations of everybody else who, recommends that book all the time. Let's just say right now, I was way more surprised with The Shining than I was by Salem's Lot.
This is going to be an interesting point that you see. I don't remember what I said in the Lot review, but the way that I remember is that as a book that is heavily recommended to a lot of people as like one of the first Stephen King books that you should read, I agree with that sentiment, but I went into it relatively skeptical, wondering if it could really be that good. This is kind of how I go into a lot of really popular stuff, is like, can it really be that good? And then I read it, and if it's actually that good, I'm and to enjoy it even more. That's what happened with Salem's Lot. That's the point that I'm referencing there. This was definitely true of The Shining, as we'll see a little bit more in this video.
So yeah, like I said in that Salem's Lot video, and I think in my reading wrap-up video for 2021 actually as well, that I was a tad bit skeptical going into Salem's Lot when I read that back in
I just explained
November, I
this, so
believe,
yeah,
of 2021.
that's
Because
consistent.
I was wondering if it could really live up to the book being ranked top 5 or top 3 by Stephen King by a lot of people. Do I agree with that? Let's talk about that. What are some of the best elements of The Shining by Stephen King? Well, to me, everything was the best element, and if that it doesn't tell you how I'm gonna be gushing.
I I genuinely loved The Shining. It was a very good book. So I think a lot of this video is really short because I just go through and say like everything about this is great. You should read it. It actually lives up to the hype.
About this book
That
throughout
that
the
was
whole
definitely
review.
the vibes
That's
that I got.
basically all you need to know, but continue on and we'll get into a little bit more of the specifics. First of all, I love the character work of this.
I'm surprised by how relatively decent my beard already looked at this point. I'm surprised by it. I don't even remember if I had, been going through and like kept the beard at this point because I'm pretty sure it was the middle of 2021 was the last time that I shaved the beard, but maybe I'm misremembering the time frame. But yeah, it actually doesn't look quite as bad as I thought it would, being a year and a half ago. But it also, a lot of that comes with the noise reduction and stuff that came from the
The
video as
character work
well.
of Stephen King in general, like in Salem's Lot, for example, was very good in the first place, and I was not disappointed by it. But this book is insane with the character work. In the
Very true.
movie for The Shining, Jack is kind of a wacko, psychopath, weird type of seeming person from the very start. But that
Yeah,
is
he
not the
he
case
comes
in this book, and
comes
that
across
actually
as weird in the
surprised me a
movie as
little bit.
well.
Because
He
Jack
comes across as a genuine human being in the book, though, and that's the point that I was
is a
making. It's
very
true.
admirable, or at least sympathetic character in the very beginning of this book, and that did all sorts
Absolutely,
of great things for me.
absolutely.
Wendy's a phenomenal character as well. You really feel super good and happy about all of these characters, but this family as well. You just feel sorry and sympathetic, but also happy for all of them because you really care about the characters, despite their
I don't
obvious
know if I would
flaws.
continue to use the
Danny
word
is a
happy,
really
but
cute kid as a
sympathetic is
character. Like I
absolutely
really liked
true.
his character in the book. Halloran is super intriguing and awesome. Like I love Halloran. I loved reading his viewpoints and his interactions with Danny as a character. At a couple different points in this book are also incredible. Like, some of the best stuff in this book is the way Halloran interacts with Danny. Outside of character work, probably my favorite thing that I noticed in this book was the foreshadowing. It is insane.
Yeah, this is still the thing that I think I recall the most about the book is the foreshadowing. I'm surprised by how well, at various points, the book foreshadows itself, making it obvious that it's foreshadowing as well. Like, even as a person who hadn't read the book and for whom, the movie is actually fairly different, especially in the ending, the fact that the book is able to foreshadow and make it so obvious that it's doing so, but not feel like it's slapping you in the face with it, was incredible to me, especially for an author like Stephen King who doesn't outline. That's probably the craziest part about the book, and one of the reasons why I thought it was so satisfying was because it revolved and wrapped in on itself so well without being an outlined book.
Insanely good.
Unless it was an
Now, I
outlined
was
book, but
vaguely aware of what the ending of this book would be because of Doctor Sleep's movie adaptation.
that's also true.
Because Doctor Sleep's movie does, at the very end, what The Shining's book does more. At least that's the way that I was explained to it. Everything about this book, in terms of foreshadowing, was incredible. Like I said, I had an idea of what the climax of the book was going to be, and because I had an idea of what that was going to be, just the seeds that are laid out throughout the entire story by King, just leading up to that, is insanely good. It was so satisfying to catch all of those things. The
I
mounting
still
tension as
completely
well is
agree with that.
very good. Like, I'm running out of ways to say incredible and very good and
I
whatnot, but
agree with all of this still as
it's
well.
kind of a
Not much
comical
else
thing.
to comment
But
really in what I'm
every few
watching.
pages just gets more tense for me. As the Overlook takes hold of Jack and the other characters and whatnot, things get crazy super quick, and it was very, very enjoyable.
Although I suppose I could definitely make a note as well here. Like, you see where my desk is over here in the closet? This is where my desk was all the way up until I moved into this position here. So even that position that my videos were at for earlier this year when I had the bookshelves behind me, but that was all that you could see behind me was the bookshelves, and then it was the desk in front of me. That was here, and this bookshelf, where this bookshelf is over here, I suppose I should put my mouse in a spot where you can see it right here. This is where one of my black bookshelves was, and the other one of my bookshelves was behind it, coming across the room that way. And then my webcam was, well, both of my cameras, when I got the new camera as well, they were hanging from the little bar up here, and that's how my setup was there. Whenever I changed positions, I moved my camera from here over to the desk over on this side so that it was angled at this wall back here when I had bookshelves back there, but then I moved it over here. And now I'm in this position over here, which, if you're looking in reference, my desk would actually be like in this spot right up here. And then I'm sitting basically right over here. That's where I'm at. And both my bookshelves, like all of my bookshelves, are along this wall here, into the corner over on this side, and then on the wall on this side. In fact, I can actually move my camera over here like this, and you can see the disaster piece that is a couple of my bookshelves as well if I move over like this. Yeah, so that's that wall like that. That's the corner that I'm referring to when I talk about that. So let's continue on and see if there's anything more I can say about the video itself.
As Jack descends into madness, because we all know that that's a lot of what the plot of this book circles around. I was legit super sad. I will just say that. I was super sad about Jack going into craziness because, like I said earlier, Jack is actually a very sympathetic person at the very beginning of this book, as opposed to the movie where he seems like a jerk from the very start. In this book, he is very likable in a lot of ways. So it broke my heart to read this book and see things just kind of fall to pieces, like almost depressed. I read parts 1 through 4 all together super, super, super quickly and just went out of my mind. Like at the end of part 4, it was affecting me so much that I had to take a break for 2 or 3 days before I actually started reading part 5 because I needed.
I forgot about that. I plowed through the beginning part of this book and read it so quickly, but then I was so affected by sort of like the tension of the story that it took me a couple days to like take a step back from it and be like, this isn't real life. I need to take a step back and I need to realize what's going on, and then I can finish the book, and that's what happened. I'm surprised that I didn't have that problem with uh these books back here. Oh man, yeah, those books have absolutely destroyed me. But I think if I were to do like, I'm definitely not ready to do a top 10 books of all time at this point in my life right now, especially with how little I've read and how much more I still want to read, especially like big, well known stuff or popular stuff or whatever the case may be, even just like personal interests that I have. But I, like I said, I'm not comfortable doing a top 10 at this point in my life, but if I were to do one right now, I'm pretty sure The Shining would be on that list. And the fact that I completely forgot about this and mentioned it in the review and now I remember is just like, okay, yeah, that's actually probably a pretty big reason why that would
To
be the
just
case.
get away for a little bit. The way that everything was just affecting all these characters that I really truly felt a deep connection to just broke my
Stephen
heart,
King's
like I
character
said.
work is
And here's an
top
opinion
notch.
that I have. Stephen King frequently gets associated with writing really bad or terrible endings. The Shining is not an example of one of them. Out of all the
I will
Stephen King
stand
books
by
that
that
I've read,
opinion
all of them have
wholeheartedly.
actually had really good endings. Carrie's ending was great. Salem's Lot ending was great. This ending was incredible.
Um, Now that I make this point, I want to think about all of the Stephen King books that I have read at one point or another and how their endings were. I don't remember Rages that well. I thought the ending to The Long Walk was super effective. I haven't done my reread of either of those two books yet, but I did read those a few years ago, even before all of this stuff. Like I said, Carrie's was good enough. Salem's Lot was really good in its way, and especially how it goes into The Dark Tower as well, because that's pretty much the only Stephen King book that I think like you need to read before you read Dark Tower, because there's a book in the Dark Tower that absolutely spoils everything about it. Um, Shining's ending is incredible. The Gunslinger's ending is effective and goes into the next story very well. Drawing of the Three, oh man, I'm trying to even remember. Oh yeah, Drawing of the Three's ending is really great. The Wasteland's ending is not good, actually. It's not good. It ends right in the middle of the climax, and that's terrible. If all of part one of Wizard and Glass was at the end of the Wastelands, then it would have had a great ending. Wizard and Glass's ending, I didn't love necessarily, but I also didn't love part four of that book in general. It was really parts two and three of that book that I adored so much. Uh, so if we were to consider the ending of that little like story within the story, that was actually really great. Went through the keyhole. I didn't have a bad ending. It was just the fact that the book didn't necessarily have a full place in the series as a whole. That kind of affected how that one was. But overall, I, I, I don't remember disliking that ending. Wolves of the Kala had a pretty good ending for what it was. That had a lot of tension and whatnot. That was like, okay, well now I need to read the next book. Song of Susanna's ending is terrible. It's actually horrible. Like it doesn't even have a climax. So the main reason I dislike that book, besides the fact that I just don't really like Susanna character a whole lot. Probably my least favorite of the main characters of that series. That ending is not good because it just doesn't happen. It just stops. And part one of The Dark Tower, the last book in the series, was actually the ending of Song of Susanna. And if it had been published that way, it would have had a great ending. But Dark Tower's ending, the last book in the series, phenomenal ending. So overall, only like two of the endings of the 12 Stephen King books that I've read at one point or another, I would say, were explicitly not good. And most of that was because of where they ended in the series rather than, the books themselves. So that's an interesting point to make as well. I haven't read a whole lot of Stephen King books yet, but the more that I go through, I'm probably going to make a point of determining, like, ranking Stephen King endings or something like that. That would be an interesting series to do.
They've all been very good. So at this point in time, I can't see the association that Stephen King can't write good endings, but I'm sure I'll see that in the future, at least a little bit. But I'll say
This was also at a point in time, if I move back here, that I kept my laptop screen's brightness way up so that I could, be able to see it. But, that was before I decided to stop using the ring light and started turning that brightness all the way down so that all of the light that reflected off my glasses was minimized.
I'll say this ending is incredible. Like I said, all of the foreshadowing is so good, so the payoff of everything that happens at the end is mind-bogglingly cool. like I can't even use words in the English language to describe and observations. In case you couldn't tell, I absolutely loved The Shine. Great doing and character arcs so well for me. It was so good.
Do
Like
I
it
even
is
have a
for
bad
me
part of
a
this
10
book?
out of
Like,
10 absolutely perfect book. Like this is probably a top 5 of all time, possibly top 3 of all time favorite book for me. It just blew me out of this world. It was
I don't
so
think that's still accurate, but like I said earlier, I think it probably would be in my top 10 right now if I did a top 10 at this
so
moment.
good. If you by any chance still haven't read The Shining yet, I 110% recommend that you do so. I'm 100% sure that 99.9% of you will not be disappointed, at least if you're already watching this video. And of course, we all know that the movie adaptation of The Shining is much different than this. The movie is still good, don't get me wrong, but man, reading this book was something else.
That
So
is
I
also
guess
true.
that'll probably do it for this video.
Yeah, that didn't necessarily have a whole lot to comment on there. Like, yeah, I main point is like in my notes over here actually. I'll just go ahead and show you. Let me go ahead and move this. Yeah, so that you're not seeing that. If I just show you my notes on here. Yeah, the introduction is, so this is going to be embarrassing. The conclusion is, so that was certainly embarrassing. And I have to say, I was wrong. Like, that is absolutely not the case. That was not embarrassing pretty much at all. There's a couple bits of it that are embarrassing. Almost all of the quote unquote embarrassment that I would feel from this, let me switch scenes again. It comes down to the visuals. Visually speaking, those early videos were not great. They did not look good, but they sounded well enough. And what I actually said, the actual content of them was pretty consistent with everything that I've done since then. And I'm super shocked by that. Like, I would have expected for, like, maybe the Gunslinger and Shining reviews, maybe the Endurance review or something to hold up a little bit better than, say, The Hobbit and Wrath of Darth Maul reviews. But even those reviews hold up a lot more than I thought I would. I thought this was going to be a cringe fest, and it wasn't. I'm pretty sure the only one of these videos, if I were to do, I'm pretty sure there's probably only like 2 or 3 of these early booktube videos of mine that I would legitimately cringe at if I were to rewatch them. So I'm just surprised that these held up as well as they did. But with that being said, I've been recording for an hour. That's definitely going to do it for this video. Thank you guys for watching and joining me on this journey, not just in this video, but over the last over a year and a half at this point in general. I greatly appreciate everything and the fact that my channel has been doing and continue to do and grow as well as it has. I cannot say thank you for that enough. I genuinely highly appreciate it. And thank you to all of the friends that I've made along the way as well, of the people in Discord that I've grown acquainted with, and those people who have supported me on the channel doing the things that I enjoy doing, not just, you know, being friends who I talk about books with, but who actually watch my videos talking about books and provide their own opinions and insight. I genuinely appreciate you guys all so much. Thank you for, you know, being there and helping me, I suppose, in some regard to get to 100 episodes of the series. I will be back next week with whatever the next video is. Probably definitely not as positive of a video. The next one on Tuesday, I'm going to be reviewing A Malice by John Gwynne, so that will be a fun one for sure. But next Thursday, I suppose I should say, 10 serialized novels I want to read in serial form. That's an exciting video that I'm ready for. But yeah, I've always got great content coming down the pipeline. And very excited about all of that. But again, thank you for watching. And if you got through all of this, man, you're a trooper, and I appreciate you even more. You guys are the real ones. Thank you for watching one last time. I'll see you guys in the next video.